Welcome to another episode of Ask CCSA. Today, it gives me incredible pleasure to interview this particular person. And so, with us today, we have Michaela Hines. Michaela is a young Barbadian who is definitely making waves on the climate scene. And I remember I was at a conference about 3 weeks ago on renewable energy, and the comment was made that perhaps Caribbean youth are not as aware of the climate crisis as other youth. And I made the comment that I do not think that Caribbean youth are apathetic. And Michaela is exactly the perfect example of a young person who is fully engaged. And so today's CCSA is going to explore the youth dimension of climate advocacy. And I'm really, really happy to have you here with me, Michaela. Welcome. So just to get us started, I just want to know a little bit about you, what got us to this point. So please share, who is Michaela Hines?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela Hines. I'm 20 years old, and I'm a second-year student at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. Born and raised in Barbados, I have developed a love for the natural world and the environment around me. And as a student in management and international business, I've become passionate about global affairs, and I would like to see sustainability as part of its development. And so that's what led me here to this point to, start my little sustainability journey.
I love it. So I think a good starting point or a good question would be, how do you think young people are leading the charge in addressing climate change? What do you see happening?
I think young people are playing a vital role in, driving action, but more so raising awareness. They're often at the forefront of environmental protests and activism activities, and they're also demanding more representation and participation in climate conversation. I think where young people have shown the most impact is in their advocacy. This is especially apparent in the age of social media. They make their wants and their needs and their desires loud and clear. They're letting the world know that they value things like sustainability and they value things like eco-friendliness, which I think really affects how the corporations and governments, for example, operate.
Yeah. So I was at a shop on the weekend, and I was talking to the store clerk, and she asked me what I do for a living, and I said, well, I work within the space of climate change. And I explained a little bit about the CCSA and what we do. And then she said, I have a little climate activist at home. We have to recycle. We have to compost. So I think, even if you're not seeing, let's say, Caribbean youth walking through the streets actually protesting, I think within the home space, you are seeing that youth are very conscious. And when in my previous life, when I was with Walker's Reserve, one of the things that we noted was that whenever we did sessions with schools, um, the, the the follow-on reaction from that was parents saying yes, their children are applying pressure to them at home to be more environmentally friendly, to be more environmentally conscious, to do simple things like walk with your reusable bags instead of plastic bags, all of those things. And so I think that there are two spheres in which advocacy happens, where it's more on a personal one-on-one basis. And then there's exactly what you would have mentioned, using your own personal platform in the form of social media to be able to actually, advocate for climate and climate justice. So if you had to do an overview of the current state of the environment and the urgency of climate change, what would that look like for you?
I think in a snapshot, I would say this. Carbon dioxide levels are the highest they've ever been. Sea levels are rising more quickly every year. Deforestation continues to occur at a rapid rate. And global temperatures are unusually high. And because of these occurrences, weather events have become more and more extreme over the years. You can see that hurricane and wildfire seasons are either starting early or they're lasting a lot longer than normal.
Yeah.
ice in the Arctic is literally falling apart, and more coral reefs are being bleached of their colors. I know in the Caribbean and across Latin America, we've been experiencing extreme weather conditions. Heat waves plague the islands, and rainy season is seemingly more aggressive than it's ever been before, I would say. So I think although climate change has been happening for a while now, the effects weren't necessarily as visible to us as they are right now. So I think that these physicalities, for lack of a better word, are a sign that, we've been looking away for far too long.
Yeah, and it's actually the perfect word because, as you said, the climate has been constantly changing, but the frequency with which and the rate at which it is happening, that is what is unnatural. And when we look at, just the hurricane season, the increasingly worse hurricane seasons that we're getting here in the Caribbean, and then of course you go to beaches. I'm pretty sure you grew up, seeing Mullins Beach and understanding how much beach it used to have before, and now there's barely any beach. And at certain times of the year, there's no beach. The beach, it's gone, right? And so there's so much that's happening. Some of it seemingly slow and incremental. Some of it very obvious. That tells us that something is wrong, right? And then the science is there to also back it up. Now, I think what we can jump into is how I met you and the reason why you're here in the first place. So you would have attended the Green Summit.
Yes.
And give me the inception story of that. Tell me how you got there. Tell me how you ended up at the Green Summit. How did that even get on your radar as a young person in the Caribbean?
Well, it's no special story actually. I one day I was just scrolling through the weekly newsletter for my university, and I just came across a flyer for Humanitarian Affairs Asia saying that they were hosting their first Green Summit. And I don't know, it piqued my interest because I've always been someone who, has found some sort of interest in sustainability and just eco-friendliness in general. And I said, you know what? Why not? So I sent in an application and I was accepted as a delegate to represent Barbados. And I did some, campaigning to raise some funds. And I ended up in Bangkok, Thailand in December 2022 at my first ever climate conference.
So, okay, so you say that this is no special story. I disagree. Because for me, I always say, and I say this to my adult friends, I say this to my younger friends, everything starts with just asking, right? So the most that can happen is that they say no. So first of all, scouting opportunities and the fact that you were even interested in it in the first place, but then you took that extra step of applying, and in applying, putting yourself out there, but you skipped over one major hurdle that you would have had, which is getting funding to go there, and you were able to advocate for what it is that you wanted to do and get several private sector institutions to contribute towards you going to this summit. And that is no small feat. So you took your initiative, and I really want that to be taken into consideration, because sometimes we see things happening and we say to ourselves, oh, that's so far removed from me. That's on the other side of the world. Or I don't have the power. I don't have the means. I don't have this to do this, right? And sometimes it means just being a bit ingenious and creative, but also just asking the right questions. And you keep knocking on one of those doors is going to open, right? So I think we need to change the narrative about nothing special. Yeah. All right. So tell me about what that experience was like for you. I mean, this would have been a global experience. You would have been interacting with young people from all over the world. Tell me what surprised you. Tell me what, was it what you expected? Tell me how that went for you.
To be honest, I think the Green Summit was probably one of the most heartwarming and inspiring experiences that I've ever had. Uh, it was really nice to just have so many brilliant young faces all in the same area, like passionate about the same things, because that's like one of the main purposes of the Green Summit, bringing like-minded people together to form a conversation. So I think it was, I don't know, it was the first time that I felt so supported, I guess I would say, in this sustainability area.
Yeah.
From weirdly enough, from people that are experiencing climate change and sustainability completely differently from me as a person from a small island nation, because I met people from all over the world, from Australia to Japan to South Africa. So it was really nice to, hear everyone's experiences and I guess just connect on that basis.
Yeah. There is something to be said for finding your tribe, right? When you're on a certain trajectory and there are not that many people who are on the same trajectory as you, it may feel sometimes like you're fighting uphill, but experiences like this kind of let you know that there are people, your tribe is scattered across the world, and there are people who feel similarly as you do, may feel some of the similar frustrations that you feel, but also they have the same trajectory in terms of what they want for this world and what they want for their lives, right? So if you had to pick out some of the most memorable experiences and learnings that you would have had, tell me what that would be for you.
Okay, so the summit put forward a very, very wide range of topics for discussion, all of which I found to be very interesting and engaging. There were talks about, common topics under the climate change umbrella, like plant-based diets and, how to be a climate activist and, what the climate scientists are saying right now. But then there were also some that went a bit further to talk about, how to design your own climate project and the importance of reconnecting humankind with the natural world and strategizing climate conversation in areas where people might not care about it or have, other immediate priorities. And I think the lecture or one of the topics that stuck with me the most was, especially as someone from an island nation, was the one about eco-mindfulness. Basically, this concept that it's this concept that you have to reconnect humans with nature so that you foster a love for the natural environment, and in turn, you realize the importance of protecting it. So I think that really stuck out to me, because usually when people think of eco-friendliness and sustainability, that's never the angle that I see people coming from. So that was one memorable talk that we had. But then another especially memorable moment was this particular workshop on strategizing climate conversation. And it was basically just, I think, around an hour, if so much, where we were split into groups and we were given a scenario about you're in a particular country or a particular area, you have this amount of funds, etc. And you just have to talk to the people, the citizens in your area, about climate change and convince them that, it's of importance, and, try to take some action there. And these are in areas where, people have other priorities. These are in areas that are suffering from poverty, and they're areas of conflict. So it was interesting to see, perspectives especially from a lot of people who were in these particular situations themselves.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, amazing. So, I often compare it if you're, well, first of all, to comment on the fact that there were practical applications, I think that's amazing, because, learning something theoretically or experiencing something theoretically, but then applying it to a situation in which there are other competing factors for people's time and attention and sense of urgency is a whole different story. And so being able to navigate that space, I think, is really important. I mean, if we're bringing it back to home, again, whenever we think about any type of intervention that is related to climate, so I'll use a very simple example of, no plastic bags, right? And you tell somebody, okay, listen, we're doing this for climate change, no plastic bags, and you don't explain the rationale behind it. The person then says, okay, so you want me to spend the $2 that I would have spent on bus fare on a reusable bag that I now need to take everywhere with me, right? And what if I forget the bag? And now I have to pay for a bag if I do want a bag at the supermarket. And so without having explained why to that person, sometimes when we talk about climate and when we talk about climate change, people get annoyed, right? Because they're like, listen, I need to feed my kids. You telling me about sustainable agriculture and this and that and overfishing and whatever. I need to feed my family, right? And so how do you address the narrative within the space of people's everyday lives? And I think that kind of leads me into my next question, because thinking about young persons, thinking about individuals, what would you say is the role of the individual in terms of climate action?
I would say, as an individual, we play a very crucial role. Despite many of us, or despite the narrative, the common narrative that there is that says that, it's the fault of corporations or it's the fault of the government. And so like, there's nothing we can do about it. I think one of the things I took away from this summit that I went to was, the power of, for lack of a better way of saying it, the power of minimal effort. Basically, it's just saying that, putting small effort, once it's combined with other small efforts from other people or in other areas of your life, it will make a huge impact, So I think it's important that for us as individuals, we educate ourselves, like we try to become aware of what's happening, and we, form our choices or our daily decisions to suit. So we can, how do I say, make sustainable choices in our daily lives, like reducing energy consumption, using public transport, adopting a plant-based diet, or practicing waste reduction and recycling. It's these very, very small things, just by taking a plastic bottle and putting it in the recycling bin versus, regular garbage. That these small things we can do to, help reduce our carbon footprint, help to make some sort of difference. You could also engage in advocacy and, awareness raising activities and support renewable energy initiatives, or just, sustainability initiatives that are going on in your area. So collectively, I think individual actions have the potential to create a significant impact and foster a culture of environmental responsibility once they're passed down.
Yeah. And that is what, when you think about, how small changes in your own life improves your own everyday life, right? So, as you said, the recycling, the choices about, the clothes you buy, how much of it you buy, how frequently you buy. So being able to, there's an organization here called Slow Food that looks at sustainable food choices, and they usually use the slogan, vote with your fork, right? And what they're saying is the way that you choose to eat has an impact, right? Because if it is that you say, I will only buy so and so, or I am, as a consumer, I'm only looking for so and so and so, then that becomes a demand for the market, right? And so we have the ability to create change, as you said, with small minimal efforts. You create that critical mass to create that change, because then, supply and demand falls into play. If there is demand, then there will be supply. So if there is a demand for sustainable options, then the supply will come, right? And so using those opportunities to, change the way that and I mean, it's not easy. I'm not going to sit down here and preach, and not, I'm not perfect either. But I think, trying to make those small incremental changes and stick into it, I think it's really important. And of course, while as individuals, we may not be contributing in a massive way to climate change impact. When we look at politicians and businesses, etc., they do too have a role to play. What do you think is their role within the space as a young person? So, what would you like to see from your leaders, whether within the business community, politicians, etc.?
So I think as humans, we all share some responsibility for addressing climate change, and arguably to different extents. And in doing that, we have different roles that we can play according to the power that we have or the resources that we have access to, for example. And with regards to uh, political leaders and businesses or corporations, they all have a crucial role to play. I think political leaders have the power to shape policies and enact legislation and implement regulations that can drive systemic change. They can set ambitious emission reduction targets. They can promote renewable energy adoption, invest in sustainable infrastructure, and even allocate resources for climate adaptation and resilience. And businesses, on the other hand, they can reduce their own carbon footprint by implementing sustainable practices, for example, transitioning to renewable energy sources in all of their operations. And they could also support research and development for climate solutions. So by demonstrating corporate leadership, I would say businesses can drive market transformation, and they can, inspire other businesses to follow suit.
Yeah, definitely. Like when you think about how they can allocate their corporate social responsibility, for a lot of organizations, they do have, whether it's a larger pot or a smaller pot of money that's allocated towards corporate social responsibility. So how do you use those resources to be able to not only just have a good human impact, but looking at, okay, if I'm doing this, how can I do it in the most sustainable way? Because sometimes, you may support humanitarian activities, which is very important. But even just in the way that you execute those humanitarian activities, I think it's really important to take into consideration sustainability. And then, exactly kind of leading into what you spoke about with businesses, looking at your value chain. So when you look at a lot of businesses, some of them, they claim to be sustainable, but when you look at their entire value chain, is the value chain that gets you to the point of your final product sustainable? And so you're hearing now a lot about ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance. And really, it's not something new, but for a lot of businesses, they are now being held accountable against those three standards. And access to financing, access to insurance, everything is being brought into alignment with that. And really, what that is about is looking at how your value chain as an organization or as a business is sustainable throughout. What are your environmental, what are your social elements, how do you interact? So it's looking at people, planet, and climate justice, on your governance as an organization. And so really there is room for everyone to play a role. And then coming back to what you said about, if it is that everyone is doing something, then it adds up, right?
Yes.
So we often hear about this term, there's no planet B. I quite like it, actually. It's a statement, and I think it's so impactful. How do you think that this Green Summit aligned with that whole concept of there's no planet B?
Actually, this phrase was used a lot in the 4 days that we were there. I think it was actually used in the opening ceremony as well by the regional director. Mm-hmm. I think the entire aim of the Green Summit aligns really well with this concept, by empowering young people to take action and become advocates for a greener society. So through their participation and their engagement, these young people or these young champions for a greener world contribute to the collective efforts of safeguarding our planet for present and future generations, aligning with the notion that we must prioritize sustainable practices and protect our only home.
Yeah, exactly. You had mentioned generation restoration, which is another phrase that I think I like very much, and I'm going to adopt in my vocabulary. What does that mean?
So generation restoration emphasizes the urgent need to restore and protect ecosystems from that have been degraded or destroyed. It's a collective effort, towards a more sustainable and resilient future. So I think generation restoration recognizes the interdependence of healthy ecosystems and human well-being, highlighting the importance of sustainable land management practices and that promote resilience, and things like food security for present and future generations.
Excellent. So if it is, let's thinking about this summit, you've gone to this summit. I'm pretty sure that while you were there, you probably felt quite empowered. And you were fully immersed in that environment, and everybody was on the same page as you. And it's a very powerful feeling. But then you have to come back to the rest of the real world, right? So how have you been able to apply any of the knowledge or the ideas that you acquired at the Green Summit in your own trajectory towards sustainability, where you see yourself going?
I haven't gotten around to developing my own projects as yet, though I would really like to. But in the meantime, I've been, trying to take part in existing initiatives to further my knowledge and experience in the area. Hence, I'm incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to share this experience with you today. So since leaving the summit, I've tried to take up opportunities to, just learn more. I took part in one of the UN portals, the UN climate portals here in Barbados at the Walker's Reserve a while ago. And now I'm having this interview with you. I've also been working with a consulting company that specializes in corporate decarbonization. And, I think it's been helpful in learning more about, the different avenues within sustainability. So though I have yet to, start a project of my own, I hope that these small efforts to help educate others and amplify climate conversation will have some positive impact.
So you mentioned that you had participated in was it the UN portal, right?
Correct.
What was your experience like with that? I also participated. So I'll tell you my experience afterward. Tell me what your experience. Who did you end up talking to on the other end of the portal?
Okay, so we ended up talking to people from 2 countries. So one, we had a talk with some students at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. And then we also talked to some older people in Mexico. So with the talk with South Africa, it honestly took a turn away from scripted questions to talking about the mining industry and corporate influence and interference in the mining industry in South Africa and how it's limiting their climate aspirations, their climate change or climate action aspirations. And then in the talk with Mexico, I think that one was also particularly interesting because it was the first time that I think I got to sit and talk directly with the older generation, and this is like the much older generation, about climate change. It was nice to see that there's usually a disparity in the conversation where people separate and they're like, oh, the younger generation, oh, the older generation, what each person should do. But I think again, we all share some responsibility and we all should come together to talk about this. So it was really nice to hear their perspectives and to have them seem interested in hearing mine.
Yeah. So my experience with the portal, we actually ended up speaking to 3 young persons, not teenagers, but within their 20s, who had all started businesses that had some type of sustainability element baked into it. One person was in the fashion industry, the other person was in health and fitness and wellness, and then the other person was working in the IT industry. And it was really interesting to see young persons, all under the age of 30, within this space, within their own way, being able to make a change, and influence people's lives within completely different industries, right? Which I think kind of drives home that point about sustainability can translate into different industries. If you just think about it, what's your value chain, what's the product you're offering, how could you make it more sustainable, etc. And that was really, really interesting. We went off script as well, but I think what was really heartwarming for me was that there's that human connection. I think you felt that too as well. And for our listeners, the UN portal was set up to allow persons from across the world to be able to communicate with each other during the COP last year, so the Conference of Parties last year for climate change, and to just be able to have and catalyze conversations around the world. But again, I think part of it too is also understanding that this is impacting different people in different places in different ways, and people are finding innovative ways of addressing, instead of feeling hopeless, they're finding innovative ways of addressing it. And I have to also say that the guys in Africa, they were up at 2 a.m. in the morning to be able to talk to us in the afternoon. It was just like they were up and they were so full of energy. So it really again, it's like these incremental steps to creating a global movement towards something that is more powerful and bigger than ourselves. And again, being able to participate in things like that, I really do think it's quite powerful. So if you had to give me a synopsis of your key takeaways, all right, your key takeaways from it, what would that look like for you?
So I think as humans, we all share some responsibility for addressing climate change, and arguably to different extents. And in doing that, we have different roles that we can play according to the power that we have or the resources that we have access to, for example. And with regards to political leaders and businesses or corporations, they all have a crucial role to play. I think political leaders have the power to shape policies and enact legislation and implement regulations that can drive systemic change. They can set ambitious emission reduction targets. They can promote renewable energy adoption, invest in sustainable infrastructure, and even allocate resources for climate adaptation and resilience. And businesses, on the other hand, they can reduce their own carbon footprint by implementing sustainable practices, for example, transitioning to renewable energy sources in all of their operations. They could also support research and development for climate solutions by demonstrating corporate leadership. I would say businesses can drive market transformation, and they can inspire other businesses to follow suit.
Yeah, definitely. Like when you think about how they can allocate their corporate social responsibility, for a lot of organizations, they do have, whether it's a larger pot or a smaller pot of money that's allocated towards corporate social responsibility. So how do you use those resources to be able to not only just have a good human impact, but looking at, okay, if I'm doing this, how can I do it in the most sustainable way? Because sometimes, you may support humanitarian activities, which is very important. But even just in the way that you execute those humanitarian activities, I think it's really important to take into consideration sustainability. And then, exactly kind of leading into what you spoke about with businesses, looking at your value chain. So when you look at a lot of businesses, some of them, they claim to be sustainable, but when you look at their entire value chain, is the value chain that gets you to the point of your final product sustainable. And so you're hearing now a lot about ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance. And really, it's not something new, but for a lot of businesses, they are now being held accountable against those three standards. Access to financing, access to insurance, everything is being brought into alignment with that. And really, what that is about is looking at how your value chain as an organization or as a business is sustainable throughout. What are your environmental, what are your social elements, how do you interact? So it's looking at people, planet, and climate justice, and your governance as an organization. And so really there is room for everyone to play a role. And then coming back to what you said about if it is that everyone is doing something, then it adds up, right?
Yes.
So we often hear about this term, there's no planet B. I quite like it, actually. It's a statement, and I think it's so impactful. How do you think that this Green Summit aligned with that whole concept of there's no planet B?
Actually, this phrase was used a lot in the 4 days that we were there. I think it was actually used in the opening ceremony as well by the regional director. Mm-hmm. I think the entire aim of the Green Summit aligns really well with this concept, by empowering young people to take action and become advocates for a greener society. So through their participation and their engagement, these young people or these young champions for a greener world contribute to the collective efforts of safeguarding our planet for present and future generations, aligning with the notion that, we must prioritize sustainable practices and protect our only home.
Yeah, exactly. You had mentioned generation restoration, which is another phrase that I think I like very much, and I'm going to adopt in my vocabulary. What does that mean?
Generation restoration emphasizes the urgent need to restore and protect ecosystems that have been degraded or destroyed. It's a collective effort, towards a more sustainable and resilient future. So I think generation restoration recognizes the interdependence of healthy ecosystems and human well-being, highlighting the importance of sustainable land management practices and that promote resilience, and things like food security for present and future generations.
So if you had to tell me what your key takeaways were from this experience at the Green Summit, obviously it was very engaging, I think very impactful for you, but if you had to summarize what your key takeaways were, what would those be?
I think, and I mentioned these in our conversation before, but I'll mention them again because I think they're so important and people don't, give them enough attention. So there's two main things that I always tell people about this Green Summit. One, the importance of reconnecting ourselves with the natural world. I think that is so important. And as someone from, an island who has grown up, like watching the sea and, basically being raised in a way that dictates that I am familiar with the environment in some way. I think it means a lot to me, I think the idea of eco-mindfulness could really help with a lot of the education that is necessary to raise even more awareness in the way that, that connection that we nurture with nature would help us to recognize the importance of protecting it and recognize our love for it, like the intrinsic relationship between human well-being and a healthy environment, And so I think in doing so, it promotes, an incentive to learn more, an incentive to want to do something and, promote adoption of like more sustainable practices that, respect and restore our connection with nature. So that's one thing. And the second thing I would say is the idea of minimal effort. I know there was one day at the Green Summit where we had some outdoor activities, and I went to plant some mangroves in rural Thailand, or on the coast, rural coast of Thailand, with I think a group around, I think it was 30 of us. And the idea where, we each planted around 2 or 3 mangroves, but just stepping back and seeing how much of an impact that made, that each of us did such a small thing, that would have such a great influence on that particular neighborhood. it, it's a nice feeling, it's a very nice feeling, and you always want to continue and do more. You feel very inspired and capable after something like that. So I think those are, the 2 things that stuck with me.
Yeah. And I mean, there are ways to do that locally, right? I mean, you can do tree plantings, you could do beach cleanups, and it might seem like a very, as exactly what you said. It's a small event with minimal effort, but it does make a difference when people get together and do it. But it also does that reconnection that you're talking about, creates that reconnection. I remember last year for one of our projects at the CCSA, we're working with this organization called CRDC Global, and they are turning all different types of plastic. So even medical grade plastic, or what is considered dirty plastic, which is very hard to recycle into something. So usually when you talk about recycling is usually done for PET, which is like plastic bottles for like soft drinks and water bottles and that kind of stuff. But they use all different types of plastic to create this resin called resin 8. And that resin is then placed in concrete and makes the concrete stronger, but also less absorbent, and can be used to strengthen like building materials and stuff. And they have projects with Habitat for Humanity, etc. And they wanted to show us the plant, but they had done a resin 8 plant with Pedregal in Costa Rica. And we're looking at seeing how we could replicate that plant in the Caribbean. And what they did is they had us do a river cleanup. So there's this huge river at the back of the plant in Costa Rica. And it was just, garbage. Garbage is littered everywhere. And so everybody got together and we got like a truckload of garbage, just picking garbage up in the bag. But then seeing that garbage go into the machine, come out as pellets, then go into the cement, and just like kind of seeing the process, you realize, oh my gosh, like this thing that I did that was minimal effort has now had like maximum impact, right? And so, looking for opportunities where we can. And I mean, even myself, when I go to the beach here, I always take a bag with me. And on my way to and from wherever I land on the beach, I pick up garbage as I go along. It's a small effort, you know what I mean? And it's just, I'm there anyway. I'm going to enjoy the space. So if I can help clean up, I'll help clean up. You know what I mean? So it's minimum actions that we take. I love that. Michaela, it was truly a pleasure having this conversation with you. I think one of my takeaways is going to be the concept of generation restoration. I love it. I love the fact that it represents intergeneration, and that it represents a collective effort, not only by young people, but by all generations, to restore and heal our planet, and all of us working collectively together for a more sustainable and resilient future, whether that be by big actions or small actions. And so that's definitely going to become part of my vocabulary, generation restoration. I think we would close off at this point, and definitely we would want to thank the private sector businesses that made it possible for you to attend this Green Summit. When you went to them, they all contributed in some way in order for you to be able to attend. So we want to say a huge thanks to Massey Stores, to the Signal Global Finance Group, Inc., Williams Industries, IGT Global, which is Barbados Lotteries, and to Shafet. Thank you so much for making this opportunity possible for our young leader to go to this Green Summit and represent Barbados, as I know that she did very ably. And Michaela, we look forward to seeing what the future has to offer for you. We hope that you continue on this trajectory with your tribe and encourage others to join you. And hoping that, this summit would have made an indelible mark on your life and that other young people will have an opportunity. So, your story, seeing the opportunity, taking the leap, reaching out, going and asking, knocking on doors and asking for help to be able to accomplish this or to attend this summit, realizing that if you want something, you have to ask, just keep asking until you get there, right? So thank you so much. Really enjoyed having you on RCCSA.
Thank you so much for having me.